By the way, before we get started, keep my wife in prayer. She's kind of sick the whole week. Then she had like a birthday party and a concert to go to. So I don't know if she just needs to rest now or if she's sick again. Jeff Haas has been really sick. So keep him in your prayers as well. And of course you got Harry, you got Josh, and my mother-in-law, but really keep Jeff in your prayers with his health. Also keep us in prayer for our radio station. We're just starting to record the programs, and it's going to add a lot more work to us, but the payoff's going to be really good. We're going to be able to reach a lot, big listening audience. So, okay, today we want to talk about traditional arguments for God's existence. And so if you have that page there, and there's the Kalam cosmological argument, Aquinas' existential causality, there's the teleological argument, the argument for design, the moral argument for reason, the absurdity of life without God. These are just some of the arguments that we're going to be looking at. And if you don't know the big words, don't worry about it. I'll break the big words down. But I think what I'm going to do, before I even get into these, I'm going to have us look at Pascal's wager, which is not really an argument for God, but Blaise Pascal was a brilliant scientist and mathematician who lived in the 1600s. He was a contemporary of René Descartes. They were both Frenchmen, both mathematicians, and they were finding like the axioms of geometry, these geometric, mathematical truths that could not be denied, and then from that they were trying to deduce everything else. And so Descartes said, he was an ultra-rationalist, we can prove everything through reason alone. And he tried to prove God's existence by doing that. Pascal, on the other hand, said, well, reason works, but he didn't trust in fallen man, sinful man's use of reason. And so Pascal argued that most of the decisions that we make in life are by something other than reason. Maybe it's our emotions, our feelings, our will, our passions, and then we sneak reason in through the back door to defend those views. So it's not that reason doesn't work, it's that sinful man uses his reason in kind of a deceitful kind of way. So Blaise Pascal said, when you look at the arguments, the evidence for or against God, you're going to be biased. No such thing as an unbiased human being. You're either going to be biased for God or against God. And so his argument is not really an argument for God's existence. It's an argument that when you look at the evidence, you ought to hope that God exists. You ought to be biased towards God, not against God. Okay? And so it's more of showing you that if you either got to bet your life on God or against God. If you decide I'm not going to wager at all, that's like betting against God. Okay? And wagering on God means like you live like God exists or you search for God. Wagering against God is living as if God doesn't exist and not searching for Him. So either God exists or God does not exist. Okay? And you can wager your life on God and seek God, or you can wager your life against God. Now, Blaise Pascal was not a betting man. Okay, he wasn't a gambler. He was a Christian who didn't gamble. But he's the guy that wrote the laws of probability. So it's kind of like he's the greatest expert in the history of Western civilization on what a good bet is, even though he didn't bet because he wrote the laws of probability. And you know, Pascal, recently they tried to figure out who had the highest IQs, and of course these guys are dead, they can't give him an IQ test, but they ranked him in 8th place in the history of Western civilization. And I can almost guarantee you that he should have been higher up on the list. Okay, it's possible, he died at age 39, it's possible if he lived to be 89, we might be having this lecture on Mars right now. This guy basically was the first guy to come up with the calculator. We got a lot of our ideas about computers from him, and this guy only lived to be 39 years old. So let's say you wager on God, okay? So you wager your life on God, you seek God, you hope that God exists, you decide to be biased for God. So you wager your life on God, and you win. God exists. What do you win? You win everything. You win eternal life. And so that's infinite, unlimited gain. Infinite gain. Okay? But if you wager on God and you lose, God does not exist. What do you lose? Nothing. Okay? You lose nothing, no possibility of loss. Okay? Some people say, well, you wasted 70 or 80 years of your life. Hey, 70 or 80 years versus infinite? What's 70 over infinite? Can somebody tell me, is that 1 millionth? No. There isn't a number for it, okay? 70 or 80 years over infinite, over eternity, for all practical purposes, is nothing. It's not even a fraction of it. There is no such thing as a fraction of an infinite. So you got no possibility of losing anything by wagering on God, and a possibility of infinite gain, okay? Well, what if you wager your life against God and God exists? Then you lose. What do you lose? You lose everything. You lose eternal life. That's infinite loss. Now, if you win, if you wager against God and you win, God does not exist. What do you win? Nothing. You win nothing. No possibility of gain. And so you just win absolutely nothing. So Blaise Pascal says, look, the wise man will always wager on God. Because if you win, you get infinite gain, but if you lose, you don't lose anything. And the wise man knows if you wager against God, you got the possibility of infinite loss and no possibility of any gain at all. And so there's nothing to win and everything to lose by wagering against God. So this is why Blaise Pascal said there's only two kinds of people who could be called wise. Those who seek God with all their hearts because they don't know Him, and those who serve God with all their hearts because they do know Him. Blaise Pascal would agree with the Bible, only the fool will wager against God. Now, Douglas Guy, a good friend of mine, philosophy professor from Biola's Talbot School of Theology, gave a lecture where he said that Pascal's wager works, but only if the evidence for and against God is equal. If it's 50-50. If it's 50-50 or better for theism, Pascal's wager works. I didn't want to, cause strife or embarrass him or anything by raising my hand, so I waited until the talk was over. I caught up to him in the hallway, and I told him that there's a philosopher named Richard Creel that explains that Pascal's wager is even stronger than that. If there's any chance at all that God exists, the wise man will wager on God. It doesn't have to be 50-50. The example Richard Creel gives, I'll kind of expand it on his example, but let's say you live at a house, you got a few acres worth of land, you got woods behind you, there's no fences, and you got a little picnic table, and you got your little 2-year-old son out there, and he's just learned how to walk. And you decide you're going to have, just you and him, you're going to have a little picnic lunch, and you realize you forget the ketchup. So you figure, I'm only going to be gone for 30 seconds. So you go and get the ketchup, you come back, and your son's gone. And you start calling his name, nothing. Then you start going looking in the woods and calling his name, nothing. Then you call the police, they come out there. They start looking, nothing. Then the media comes and everybody starts finding out, and all of a sudden you got the entire town is looking for your kids. And they spend 48 hours looking for your kid and they can't find your kid. And then the sheriff comes up to you and says, look, there's only a 1% chance your kid, with the weather and the animals out there, there's only a 1% chance your kid is still alive. Is it okay if we call off the search? What are you going to say? You're going to say, no way. If there's any chance my kid is still alive, there's so much to gain and nothing to lose by continuing the search. We're going to continue the search. This is infinitely more important than that, is dealing with God. If there's any chance God exists, Pascal's wager wins the day. So the first thing we need to recognize is, since there's nothing to win by being an atheist and the possibility of losing everything, and there's nothing to lose by being a Christian and the possibility of infinite gain, the wise man is going to at least be biased towards Christianity before you look at the evidence. And so that's the way we should start this. I think Pascal is hitting the nail on the head here. Now Pascal doesn't like arguments for God's existence, so he just moves right on to historical evidence for Jesus, something that we'll cover much later in fulfilled prophecies, and then the miraculous preservation of the Jewish people, even for thousands of years not having land of their own. But we will look at some of the traditional arguments for God's existence. I do like some of the arguments for God's existence. Plus, Pascal wasn't really dealing with as many atheists. He was dealing with people who believed in different kinds of gods. But he's saying, look, just the possibility of a God who rewards those who seek him, just the possibility that that type of God exists, we ought to seek him. And now with the traditional arguments, I'll talk about my cumulative case either later tonight, but we'll just turn the page and go to the Kalam cosmological argument. I think Kalam is the Muslim word for time. And it argues that time had a beginning. But the Kalam cosmological argument basically says that everything that has a beginning needs a cause. The universe had a beginning, therefore the universe needs a cause. Okay? So that first premise, everything that has a beginning needs a cause, that used to be considered self-evident. That if something began to exist, it could not cause its own existence. Okay, so something that has a beginning, let's just say A has a beginning. Well, it can't be self-caused, okay? Because in order for something that has a beginning to cause its own beginning, it would have to pre-exist its own existence to bring its own existence about. That's absurd. If it had a beginning, it couldn't be there to cause that beginning. Okay? So, self-causation fails. Well then, if it has A has a beginning, maybe it was uncaused. Well, how can something come into being without a cause? That's tantamount to saying nothing caused A to exist. Okay? Now, as a philosopher, I've spent hours studying nothing. You know, if I were a scientist, you know, there's theoretical physicists that can just come up with weird ideas. They don't have to study something, but most scientists in the hard sciences, you gotta study something. As a philosopher, you could actually become an expert on nothing. You could talk about nothing. And what I've learned about nothing is that nothing is nothing, therefore nothing can do nothing, therefore nothing can cause nothing. So if something had a beginning, it had to be caused, but nothing couldn't be a candidate, cannot be a candidate for it. So uncaused fails. Nothing cannot cause something, so it had to be caused by another. Okay? So if the universe had a beginning, it had to be caused by something else. And so did the universe have a beginning? If we can establish that the universe had a beginning, then we could see that it needs a cause. It can't be self-caused. It can't be caused by nothing. It'd have to be caused by something else. Well, the second law of thermodynamics is entropy. Now, the first law of thermodynamics is energy conservation. Second law is energy deterioration, or entropy. The first law says that the amount of energy in the universe today remains constant. No energy is presently being destroyed or created. The amount of energy remains the same. Okay? The second law of thermodynamics says even though the amount of energy remains the same, as we move forward in time, it changes form. And as it changes form, it becomes less and less usable. Okay? See, we take energy from outside of our system, whether it's sunlight or food or water, and we bring it into our system to use that energy, okay, to give us more energy. So we take energy from outside because we're not a closed system. But we can't drink the same water twice. We can't eat the same food twice. Once we use it up, we've got to go for more. But the universe, if you're going to be an atheist, you've got to view the universe as a closed system. There's nothing outside the universe to replenish the energy in the universe that's being used up. So what that tells us is that the amount of usable energy, though the amount of energy remains constant, the first law, the amount of usable energy is winding down. And so the universe is running out of usable energy. If it's winding down, it had to be wound up. If you go backwards in time, there was more and more usable energy in the universe until eventually you reach a point where all the energy in the universe was in a usable state, and that would mark the beginning of the universe. Okay? So the second law of thermodynamics teaches us that the universe had a beginning. Now we've known this law since the 1850s. Should have known it earlier because the Bible teaches it right from the start. Bible teaches that God created the universe in 6 days and then he ceased from his creation work. Well, that's the first law. The amount of energy remains the same. And then Jesus said that heaven and earth will pass away, but his words will not pass away. That's the second law. Okay? And but in the 1920s, evolutionists used to argue the universe is eternal, it didn't have a beginning, therefore it doesn't need a cause. But then we started finding out that the universe appears to be expanding in all different directions as we move forward in time. But that means if you move backwards in time, the universe will get more and more dense until eventually you reach a point where the entire universe is a point of infinite density. What scientists call it a point of infinite density or a point of dimensionless space. Think about that. If something is small, it can only be finitely small, finitely dense. If it's infinitely dense, dense without limit, it's not there. Okay? No matter how small it is, you could cut it in half.
It's a fancy word for nothing.
But yeah, it's a fancy word for nothing because they don't want to say nothing. Yeah. When you talk about a physical point, the physical thing, the universe, this physical thing at one time was a point that took up no dimensions in space. It means that at one time the universe took up no space. It wasn't there. Again, a fancy way to say nothing. Okay? This is why, and so basically the Big Bang teaches, and I don't even hold to the Big Bang, but all my opponents hold to the Big Bang. Many Christians do hold to the Big Bang. But whatever the case, whether you talk about the second law of thermodynamics or the Big Bang cosmology, they both teach that the universe had an absolute beginning. It wasn't there, and then boom, it was there. Okay? And since from nothing, nothing comes, the debate right now between Christians and atheists is either in the beginning God made the universe, or in the beginning nothing made the universe. Now, I don't know why I'm spoken about. I was listening to, I never listened to Michael Medved's show, but they had a show where he had an atheist author on. He was clobbering. Michael Medved's Jewish, so he was clobbering this guy. And, but the guy was acting like all these evil Christians are trying to get creationism taught in the public schools. And Michael Medved was saying, and he's acting like they're trying to get evolution taken out of the public schools. And Michael Medved's saying, no, they just want either creationism or intelligence design taught alongside. Well, what Medved never brought up was that if you're a Christian who doesn't believe in evolution, you still have to pay your property taxes to pay for your schools. So this jerk, be honest with you, this jerk is saying, we're going to take Phil Fernandes' money, even though he doesn't believe in the public schools, and we're going to teach evolution, and we're going to try to refute creation on Phil Fernandes' dime. And that's why I really encourage people to either homeschool or put your kids in Christian schools. But whatever the case, this guy was acting like we're Neanderthals. That was his assumption. And it's like, really, are we really the dumb guys here? Are we really the fools? We believe in the beginning a miracle-working God created the universe out of nothing. I don't see anything incoherent or foolish about that. But the other side is saying, in the beginning, absolutely nothing created the heavens and the earth. And so I will give to the atheists their due. They've managed to repeat the same foolish lie over and over again to where it sounds believable. And now they control the media, they control the schools. I'll salute them. You guys won this big culture war. But the fact remains, if you believe that nothing created the universe, you're a fool. I don't care how brilliant you are, how well educated you are. That's a very fool. And I'm not talking about an intellectual fool. I'm talking about a moral fool who's going to embrace the idea that nothing created the heavens and the earth. It's like when I had Japanese students who happened to be Buddhists. And then from my classroom, you could see the weight room, and they were telling me that nothing. Yeah, they were telling me Big Bang made everything. I said, well, what caused the Big Bang? They said nothing. And so I told them, I said, their English was very bad. And I pointed to the weight room. I said, I have the power to lift weights. And they went, oh, lift weights, oh. And I said, but I don't have the power to make everything. And they started laughing. It was pretty obvious I didn't make the world. And I said, nothing doesn't have the power to lift weights. And they laughed and they're smiling. And I said, so how could nothing make everything? And then they got quiet and they talked together. And then their spokeslady said, we don't want to talk anymore. And but that's what we've been reduced to. The idea that nothing created everything that exists, that's a dumb idea. And the only way people would believe that would be if it was repeated over and over again. Even then they wouldn't believe it. So you got to say things like point of infinite density or a point that takes up no dimensions in space. This is why Robert Jastrow in his book God and the Astronomers, which is pretty much a children's book kind of, but at the end of that book, because of Big Bang cosmology and finding out that the universe did have a beginning, because the atheists in the 19th century used to argue the universe doesn't need a cause because it didn't have a beginning. It's eternal. It's always been here. Now they admit it had a beginning, but it still doesn't need a cause. I'm sorry, that doesn't hold much weight. But Robert Jastrow, who classifies himself as an agnostic himself, he's not even sure if God exists, but he said it's like a bunch of scientists are climbing the mountains of knowledge, and they get to the top and they pull themselves up, and they find a band of theologians have been waiting there for them for centuries. And the only problem I have with that analogy is the fact we've been there for thousands of years, not centuries. And what he's basically saying is the Big Bang sounds a lot like in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. The universe had a beginning. So basically, with the cosmological argument, everything that has a beginning needs a cause. The universe had a beginning, so the universe needs a cause. Well, you might say, okay, well, maybe the cause of the universe needs a cause. Okay? And then maybe that cause needs a cause. And maybe that cause needs a cause. You cannot go back infinitely. Okay? Because in order to get to the present effect we call the universe, there had to be a first cause. See, if you had an infinite number of causes before the present moment now, you would never reach the present moment now because it's impossible to traverse an infinite set of causes and effects. Okay? That's like Zeno. Zeno, the Greek philosopher, he mistakenly thought that between point A, that wall, and point B, this wall, he mistakenly thought that there was an actual infinite number of points between the 2 points. And that, we can contest that. So he said, so if you try to move from point A to point B, from that wall to that wall, first you'd have to get halfway. But you can't get to the halfway point unless you got to the 1/4 point. But you can't get to the 1/4 point unless you got to the 1/8 point. But you can't get to the 1/8 unless you got to the 1/16. And you keep going on. So if matter is infinitely divisible, movement is impossible. And so I would argue that movement obviously is possible, therefore matter is not infinitely divisible. So though Zeno thought he proved that movement is an illusion, he didn't. But what he did prove without realizing it was that you cannot traverse an actual infinite set of finite points. Okay? That if you got an infinite number of steps to take, not only will you never arrive at that final destination, you'll never even attain to a fraction of that destination. You'll never even move closer to that. In other words, what that tells us, there had to be a first moment in time. When God created the space, matter, energy universe, he also created time. Okay? Time had a beginning. And so there has to be some eternal uncaused cause of everything else that exists. So you could even, show through infinite set theory that infinite sets can only really exist inside of mind. Let's say you get all the real numbers starting at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, going on and on, infinite. Can we agree that's an infinite set because it goes on forever, okay? But set B has just 1/5 the members, but it's still an infinite set. And then set C has 1/10 the members of set A and 1/2 the members of set B, but it's also infinite. So all three of these sets are equal. They have the same amount of members, infinite, yet one, it has only 1/5 the members of the other. The other one has only 1/10 of these. So how can this be only 1/10 of that and still be infinite, and 1/2 of that and still be infinite? Okay, what that's telling us is we're dealing with the mathematical, the hypothetical realm, but these things cannot exist outside of a mind. By the way, an infinite number of things can only exist in a mind, but by definition, that mind would have to be infinite. So the only place where an infinite set could actually exist would be in the mind of God, which basically means we'll be learning more and more about God's truth and more about God throughout all eternity, but we'll never reach a day where we say, oh man, I've been in heaven for 10 billion years. Now I know everything God knows, and the rest of eternal life is going to be really boring. No, we're going to continue to be learning. So I hope you enjoy learning now, because this is what we're going to be doing for all eternity. And but whatever the case, but it's telling us that this infinite set cannot exist outside of a mind, and it would if there was an infinite regress of causes and effects. But it can't. And then it's also impossible to traverse an infinite set of things such as moments, so there had to be. So there can only be a finite number of moments. There can only be a finite number of causes and effects. And what that tells us is eventually you have to arrive at a first uncaused cause of everything else that exists. Does anybody have any questions about the Kalam cosmological argument? St. Bonaventure liked this, as well as some Muslim philosophers like this throughout the medieval times. Anybody have any questions on that? Okay, so that to me is like the simplest of the cosmological arguments. We're not going to talk about Leibniz's cosmological argument from sufficient reason, but we will talk a little bit about Thomas Aquinas's argument for God from existential causality. This is it's a little more difficult to understand. If you don't get this one, don't worry about it, but I do like it a lot. I think it's Aquinas' third way to argue. He's got 5 ways to argue for God's existence. And so let's say this represents everything that exists, okay? And let's say that we assume there's no God, so everything that exists is contingent. In other words, everything that exists is dependent on something else for its continued existence. In other words, everything that exists has the possibility of non-existence. Okay? Like I have the possibility of non-existence because there was a time when I didn't exist. You have the possibility of non-existence. There was a time when you didn't exist. Okay? So if everything that exists has the possibility of non-existence, given enough time in the future, the scenario would obtain in which every possibility for non-existence will have been actualized so that nothing would exist. Okay? Every possibility for non-existence will have been reached and nothing would exist. Problem is, if you go back far enough in time, you'd reach a point where that same scenario would have obtained, where every possibility for non-existence will have been actualized and nothing would exist. So in other words, the only way to ground all finite, limited, contingent, dependent existence, things that could possibly not exist, the only way to ground their continued existence is to ground them in a totally necessary being, a being that cannot not exist, a being that has no possibility of non-existence. Okay? I'm going to water it down a little bit so it'll be more understandable, but it won't have as much intellectual force, rational force, as this has. You could say, if everything that exists is dependent, well, I can just write it out this way. The cause, that's all existential causality means, the cause of the continuing existence of something. The cause of the continuing existence of all dependent beings must be totally independent. Okay? I greatly watered it down so it's lost a lot of its force, but at least it's easier to understand. But every dependent thing that exists, it depends on something else. If something else goes out of it, for instance, I depend on water, food, for my continuing shelter, for my continuing existence. So if those things were to go out of existence, I would, eventually die too. But the cause of the continuing existence of all dependent beings must be totally independent. The more precise philosophical way of saying it is the way I showed it first, that all existence cannot have the possibility of non-existence, for then nothing would have existed in the past, from nothing that becomes. Something must be eternal and have no possibility of non-existence, must be a necessary being. Another way of saying this would be all finite, limited existence must be grounded by infinite existence. Another way of saying it, all finite beings need an infinite cause. I'm not really talking about the cause for the beginning of their existence, but the cause for their continuing existence. Okay? If I talk about the cause of the beginning of the existence of this book, okay, we'd be talking about the printers and the ink and the binding machines and all that, okay? But if I'm talking about the cause of the fact that this book continues to hover 3 feet off the ground, I'm talking about simultaneous causation. So that if we were to remove this table or remove the book from the table, it would fall, okay? And that, so we're not talking about the beginning of our existence with Aquinas' argument. We're talking about the continuing existence. So I don't know if that helps you at all. If you have questions about it, just let me know. I'll try to address them. That's one of my favorite arguments. I rarely use it anymore in debates because even most college students can't track this. But I think it's a really powerful argument. But if nobody has any questions, then we'll move on to the teleological argument, the argument for design and order in the universe. Okay, I'm going to start out, I don't think it's in your notes, but with Aquinas' design argument. The teleological argument See, the cosmological argument comes from the Greek word cosmos for world, so it's arguing for the cause of the universe. Teleological from telos, the Greek word for end or goal. And so you're looking for purpose there, design and order. But I like Aquinas' argument here, and it's not in your notes, but Aquinas' I think it's either his fourth way or his fifth way, but he says this: the mindless things of nature regularly move towards the same goals. Therefore, there must be a mind governing the mindless things of nature. You'll often hear evolutionists trying to argue from the laws of nature, the physical laws of nature, the way nature generally operates, as arguments against God and against miracles. Aquinas says, look, if there's no God, there'd be no laws of nature, there'd be no patterns of nature. The order, the design that we see in the physical laws of nature show us that when the mindless things of nature, like acorns always growing up to be oak trees and not apple trees or something else, it shows us there must be a mind governing the mindless things of nature and moving them towards those goals. He says it's like an arrow hitting the bullseye of a target. That doesn't happen by accident. The arrow is mindless. It doesn't know where it's going. It takes an archer who has the intelligence and the precision to hit the bullseye. Okay? And so Aquinas actually has a design argument for God from the laws of nature. So, in fact, this is one of the reasons why the last few popes have embraced theistic evolution, is because it just so happens this argument for God works even if evolution is true, which it's not. And Aquinas didn't believe in evolution. No knowledgeable person in his day believed in it. As far as in academia, they were all Christian schools back then. But even if evolution were true, Aquinas would say, when you see the single-celled animal got more designed and more complex and evolved eventually into human beings, obviously these mindless things of nature could not have done that on their own. There had to be a mind behind it. So even if you assumed evolution, Aquinas would say, you would need a rational God governing and superseding, overseeing evolution to bring it to its goals. Now again, Aquinas didn't believe in evolution, but the Roman Catholic Church has recognized that even if evolution were true, this argument from Aquinas would still work. And of course we think the Pope is way out to lunch when he embraces evolution. But whatever the case, some of the more common teleological arguments three main ones: the specified complexity, irreducible complexity, and the anthropic principle. Yes, I've got them in there in the notes, so you don't have to write these down. Specified complexity. William Dembski's real big on that. Irreducible complexity. Michael Behe, author of Darwin's Black Box, is famous for that. And in the anthropic principle, Ross does a good job explaining that, and we'll talk about those. Specified complexity is just the amount of highly complex information we find in living things. The highly complex genetic information we find in living things. And so, for instance, even Richard Dawkins acknowledges that a single-celled animal contains enough genetic information to fill about 20,000 volumes of encyclopedia. Okay? Now, no matter how many explosions you have in a print shop, you're never going to accidentally produce one volume of encyclopedia. You could have everything you need to make that one volume of encyclopedia. It's not going to happen by accident if you have an explosion. Okay? Explosions do not cause more order and complexity, but they take things from a state of order and complexity and bring in chaos and disorder. Okay? Hoyle and McRamsing looked at how complex the single most simple form of life, a single-celled animal, they saw how complex it was, so they tried to figure out what are the chances of that happening by accident. And what they found was, there were two of Great Britain's leading evolutionists at one time, what they found was that life evolving from non-life is as likely as a tornado randomly running through a junkyard and accidentally producing a fully functional Boeing 747. Okay? In other words, what they're saying is it can't happen. It cannot happen. Okay? And so that's specified complexity. If you came in here today and I was eating alphabet cereal, and you walked up to talk to me and you noticed on the side of the bowl of alphabet cereal, it said, Seahawks stink, Raiders rule. And then let's say you're real passionate about your love for the local team, the Seahawks, and you say, hey, that's messed up, man. You can't be dissing my team, especially with your team. Your team's losing all the time. You guys are only 2-12 and this and that. And I said, oh, no, hey, don't get me wrong, man. I'm not dissing your team. I'm just eating alphabet cereal, and I spilled some of the cereal. So don't get on my case, that just randomly fell in that order and accidentally spelled Seahawks stink, Raiders rule. Are you going to believe that or not? No. Just that amount of information couldn't get here by chance. In fact, remember they used to say, the evolutionists used to say that if you give monkeys a typewriter and enough time, they'll be able to write from beginning to end one of Shakespeare's plays. Well, an Israeli scientist decided to put that to the test, and I think it was over a month. He put a computer keyboard in the monkey cage with all these monkeys, and with printer, pages that could print and all this other stuff. And after a month, now the monkeys used the keyboards more for a bathroom than for anything else, so it was a real mess. But with pages that were printed out from all the typing that these monkeys accidentally did, the scientists stated they did not even spell one word. Now I thought, well, of course he doesn't mean one-letter words like I or Well, yeah, he did mean those. They're not in there either. He said, look, for it to be an I, it's got to be a capital I with a space before it and a space after it. Nowhere to be found. 1 month, all these monkeys stepping all over the keyboards. For it to be it'd have to be a small a with a space before it and a space after it. Nowhere to be found. These monkeys couldn't even accidentally spell one-letter words, let alone complete sentences. Okay, and so this is random chance. We didn't. The more, if I took confetti and just dropped it on the floor, it would not spell any words. So the evolution says, of course not. We just need more time. Good. Let's get the confetti and go up in a helicopter and then drop it. Now you got more time. You're going to get something close to a word now? No. It's going to even be more disheveled and more disorganized. So, and this is really, Dwayne Gish used to say this, when a frog turns into a prince, instantaneously, we call that a fairy tale. But when a frog turns into a prince over a period of millions upon millions of years, we call it good science. And Dwayne Gish was saying, it shouldn't be the case. It's just a longer, more boring fairy tale. It's not good science. So that's specified complexity. William Dembski's a go-to guy on that. If you want the most simplified book written by Dembski on that, he co-authored it with Josh McDowell's son, Sean McDowell, a book on intelligent design. Now, Michael Behe is famous for irreducible complexity. He's a nominal Christian. I think he's Roman Catholic, and last I heard, he's not real serious about his faith. But he's just a scientist, a microbiologist, and he said that a black box in science is something where we hit a dead end. We don't know what's inside the black box. And for Charles Darwin, that's the way it was on the submolecular level. So Charles Darwin assumed that we look really well designed because we're a bunch of simple molecules put together. But on the submolecular level, everything is really simple. That's what Darwin assumed. But we couldn't look on the submolecular level. Now we can. And Michael Behe from Lehigh University said, well, Darwin got it wrong. On the submolecular level, there are entities that are as complex as spaceships or computers that are irreducibly complex. So what he means is they're as complicated as computers or spaceships, but if you remove one part, or if one part doesn't function properly, these things don't function, and then they would just die out. Okay? So in other words, they could not have been any less complex. They had to be created that way. If they were any less complex, they wouldn't survive long enough to evolve into something else, something more complex. Okay? And so you have these little microscopic entities, like the bacterium flagellum is one of the examples that he gives, but you have these submolecular entities that are as complex as computers or spaceship, yet if they were any less complex, they wouldn't survive long enough to evolve into anything else. They had to be created that way. He even uses the illustration of a very simplistic mouse trap, that if it was missing either the wood, the metal, or the spring, just one part, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't do what it was supposed to do. It wouldn't function. It wouldn't kill mice. And he says that's the way it is with these things, only they're as complex as computers or spaceships. They had to be created that way to perform their function. I mean, just look at the evolution of the human eye. So many things have to be fully developed and in the proper place to function properly so that you could see that if the human eye evolved, how long would that take? I don't know, millions of years, I guess, if you got all these good consequences, good chances and stuff, millions of years, and all during that time you wouldn't be able to see until it gets fully formed. No, the eye didn't evolve, it was created that way, okay? And so that's irreducible complexity. Then the anthropic principle, from the Greek word anthropos, for man. What that is, that scientists say that the universe appears as if it was created. The entire universe appears as if it was created for the purpose of supporting human life, anthropos, human life on the planet Earth. But then the scientists say, but that can't be true. That sounds too much like Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. So they come up with their own anthropic principles. Okay? And basically what they're doing is they're trying to explain away the evidence. Look, either science is studying the way the universe appears and drawing conclusions from it, or science is looking at the way the universe appears and then trying to explain it away. But whichever you choose, one is science, the other isn't science. The other would be science fiction. And but that's what these guys are doing. They got Hugh Ross so mad. He said they ought to come up with a view on the anthropic principles. They always, whatever their anthropic principle is, they put a few initials in front of AP. And so he says some of these are so far-fetched that they ought to come up with one and just call it the completely ridiculous anthropic principle. And of course, you spell it out, and you can see exactly what Hugh Ross is talking about there. But whatever the case, if you change the chemical composition on the far extremes of the universe, far extremities of the universe, there'd be no possibility of life on the planet Earth. There's about 35 to 50 different parameters. It's like the universe was fine-tuned to support human life on the planet Earth. But you look within our own solar system, scientists would love to find a planet with water on it. If they find a planet with water on it, does that prove life on other planets? No. Water is not life, but living things need water. So it would be like saying, I hope there's let's say I come back here and I open up the building with my key at midnight and I say, I think somebody's here because I found some sneakers in the lost and found. And humans will often wear sneakers. So there must be another human here. Well, there might not be anybody here. So just because you find something that might accompany what you're looking for doesn't mean what you're looking for is actually there. Scientists would salivate if they found an Earth approximately our size and our shape. A sphere approximately the size of planet Earth. No big deal. Because you still need not only that, but you need also a sun, the proper size and the proper shape. Also, almost exactly the proper distance. You need your planet's got to have the right rotation and the right revolution around that sun. You also got to have a moon, the right size and the right shape and the right distance from your planet with the proper revolution around the Earth to control the tides. You got to have, every quarterback needs an offensive line. We've got the best blocker ever created in Jupiter. Jupiter every day is blocking asteroids from hitting the planet Earth that would totally wipe out the planet Earth and barely even makes a dent on Jupiter. Okay? So it's like a vacuum cleaner there. So for all practical purposes, you would pretty much need an exact replica of our solar system in the right part of the universe, as well as many other factors to support life. And when evolutionists talk about the chances of life evolving on other planets, do you know what they assume in their mathematical equation? Because they say, well, there must be X amount of planets, even though we haven't found any of these. There must be X amount of planets outside of our solar system, just because the universe is so vast and all this other stuff. And the chances, they insert a 1. There's a 1 in there. And they multiply by this 1, and they come up with the chances of life, intelligent life existing on other planets. And it's all based, but you know what that 1 stands for? That 1 stands for the one planet that we already know where intelligent life did evolve. Wait a minute, you guys haven't proven that, you just assume that. So, I mean, if you timed it by 0, if you're a creationist and you say, no, the life didn't evolve on the planet Earth, you would just put a 0 there, and you multiply it by 0, there's no chance that life, intelligent life, evolved from non-life anywhere in the entire universe. That if there is intelligent life both here and somewhere else, it would have to be created by an intelligent being. And so they smuggle in that number 1, assuming, well, we know of one planet where life evolved from non-life without intelligent intervention, and that's Earth. And it's like, no.
Doesn't that defy their own law of probability? Just in the sheer number?
But with their number, it's like an astronomical number, but the universe is so big that the evidence seems to indicate that there's more planets. But even there, they don't factor in. I believe that equation is just done, and I could be wrong, but I believe that's just done on the size of the universe, the vastness of the universe. So they're not even factoring in all these anthropic parameters, the fine-tuning stuff, because once they factor in all that, not only do we as creationists disbelieve that any intelligent life evolved either here or there, but you wouldn't even have the chance of supporting intelligent life anywhere else in the universe if you've got to meet all these other factors. So it's just kind of, they fudge the numbers, but the real key is they assume that intelligent life evolved from non-living material without intelligent intervention here on Earth. So they just assume evolution. See, and that's what we've got to understand. Evolution is a myth. And I don't mean anything derogatory by it, but what I mean is it's just a grand story, a narrative that most of the world's leading scientists have bought into, whether they believe in God or not. Because a lot of them are theistic evolutionists, and but it's not like anybody has proven that something can come from nothing totally without a cause. That's just assumed. It's not like anybody has proven that life evolved from non-life. That's just assumed. There's no scientific proof for that. There's no scientific proof for multi-celled animals coming from single-celled animals. There's no proof for animals with backbones evolving from animals without backbones. There's no proof for the common ancestry of fish, reptiles, birds, and mammals. All of this is assumed. It's not proven. None of that is proven. Evolutionists have proven an awful lot, but everything they've proven is perfectly consistent with the creation model. So it's kind of like you got creation and you got evolution. Evolutionists have never proven anything here. All they've proven is things that are consistent with creationism, even if some of that stuff is also consistent with evolution, like gradual change within a species. Just look at the Chihuahua, look at a Great Dane. There's a whole lot of variety there, okay? Yet, the Chihuahua or the Great Dane have never evolved so that they became non-dog. To prove evolution, you got to prove dog can evolve into non-dog. That's never been proven. They've only proven that dogs could have a tremendous amount of variety, which is perfectly consistent with creationism. They've proven common anatomy. so they say common ancestry. But common anatomy does not contradict creation, because we say common designer. Okay? When I look at two Norman Rockwell paintings and I recognize the similarities, I don't say, oh, okay, one must have evolved into the other. I say, no, they both have the same designer, the same artist, the same painting. So yeah, you can prove common anatomy, and then you can pretend that that proves common ancestry, but not necessarily so. It could just as easily, if not even easier, prove common designer. And so we've got to understand that I will give you the most powerful argument for evolution right now. In fact, that smart kid that's 16 years old and is Richard Dawkins buff, okay, or Richard Dawkins, what's the word?
Protege?
Groupie or whatever. The reason why he believes in evolution is because that's what he's been told. The strongest argument for evolution is that most of the world's leading scientists believe in it. Yeah, well, most of the people on the planet Earth are not believers. It only makes sense that most of the leading evolutionists would not be believers either. By the way, by saying that most of them are evolutionists, I am not saying that most of them are atheists. There's a debate about what percentage are actually atheists, but it seems that most scientists believe in some kind of God, even if it's not the Christian God. Albert Einstein was not trying to be comical when he said that God does not play dice with the universe. What he's saying is that his colleague Heisenberg's principle of indeterminacy, subatomic particle movement, seems to violate the law of causality. And he said, no, I can't accept that. There's something we don't know about that. But I don't accept that things happen without a cause. God set up this universe in an orderly way. Now, his concept of God was much different than the Christian concept of God. He seems that he embraced Spinoza's concept of God, which was very close to pantheism. But the fact of the matter is, Albert Einstein acknowledged there's got to be some type of God. Okay? And but whatever the case, we've got to realize that evolution is a story, is a narrative that people have agreed to embrace without evidence, and then they just ridicule everybody who disagrees with them on it. Now that's the way they portray us. I don't know how many in this room, but I myself was very skeptical towards Christianity from about age 18 to about age 20. Now I'm not going to lie to you and say that I came to Jesus based on an intellectual search for truth. I didn't. In my case, it was a search for meaning. When I was guarding nuclear weapons, joining the Marine Corps, I thought it was going to be exciting. We had hostages in Iran. I didn't know that Reagan was going to get elected while I was in boot camp. Khomeini was going to cough up the hostages. In my 3 years in the Marine Corps, I'm glad now that it's one of my goals, to die without killing a man. Okay? And, but growing up in New Jersey, joining the Marine Corps, I thought it was going to be adventurous. I thought I was going to be shooting at guys and they were going to be shooting at me. Instead, they sent me to guard nuclear weapons. And the Bin Ladens of the world don't mess with Marines during nuclear missile movements, because there's more Marines than there are, there's like 5 Marines for every human being that's out there. There's so much overkill. And so for me, it was a search for meaning. But the fact of the matter was, I bought into the grand narrative, the grand story, just because if you don't believe the truth, you embrace the reigning lie. And evolution is it, but really the number one reason when people say that they're evolutionists and you're an idiot for not being one, really what it comes down to is, I believe what I'm told. And it is, they'll slam Christianity. At one time before the Protestant Reformation, we were all under the banner of Roman Catholicism, and so you get slammed for blindly submitting to an infallible pope. To be totally honest with you, I don't submit to an infallible pope. I believe in an infallible, inerrant Word of God, and I believe there's good reasons for that. And I learned the hard way, lived the first 21 years of my life rejecting this book. But I'll tell you, there are plenty of infallible popes out there, outside of Roman Catholicism. I'm not Roman Catholic, so I'm not going to be kissing the Pope's ring anytime soon, okay? But the fact of the matter is, there are infallible popes all over the place outside of Christianity. They call themselves scientists, and they want us to bow and kiss their ring. And if you bow and kiss their ring, you think you're brilliant, and those idiot Christians are, it's just like, look, whatever. The day's going to come when you guys are going to throw us in prison. You're going to torture us. You're going to execute us. Whatever it is you're going to do. But don't think that you're courageous in doing what you're doing. The fact of the matter is you're just jumping on the bandwagon. But we've got to see through it for what it is. A lot of big terminology, but even people like Stephen Hawking, one of the most brilliant men on the planet Earth, when he says that the law of gravity created the universe, before the universe there was no law of gravity. So it's almost, when you understand what these guys are saying, you start to wonder, are they smoking something? But he's acting like there's some kind of law behind the physical laws where the universe had to come into existence. And it's like, dude, what are you talking about? Why don't you just embrace the fact that this is a creation and it needs a creator? Okay, so those are the types of intelligent design. And so basically what science tells us, the anthropic principle, is that the universe was designed to support life on a planet. It's almost like, I don't want us to get back to the Enlightenment rationalists who viewed the universe as one big machine, but for all practical purposes, it's kind of like, it's like if God creates a body and one of the things that it does is produce more blood or whatever. Well, the universe, one of the things it does is sustain human life on a planet Earth. And so it's almost like not only the solar system, but the entire universe. It's kind of like, it's kind of a bad analogy, but it's kind of like a big machine and a big environment to support human life on a planet Earth. And for all these cosmic accidents to occur with no goal, it just happens that way. Evolution is one coincidence after another, and each coincidence is accidentally, or most of the coincidences aren't, but some coincidences are, so that as we move forward in time, things get more complex and more orderly. Again, it's kind of like, what are you guys smoking? That's not the way things are. That's not a scientific statement. So that's the argument from intelligent design. I don't want to rush through the argument from reason, or the moral argument. So we'll spend some time on those plus the meaning of life next week.